The Montana wind didn't just carry the scent of snow, it carried gunpowder and death. Margaret Reed was just supposed to be passing through the dusty little town of Willow Creek. A quick stop, restock supplies, rest her horse, and get back on the trail north before the storm hit. She was 5 months pregnant, alone, and all she wanted was the sanctuary of her sister's homestead. That sanctuary felt a million miles away when the first shot rang out. It cracked through the air like a whip, and the whole town scattered. People dove behind water troughs and barrels, their faces masks of terror. Margaret froze, one hand instinctively flying to the gentle swell of her belly. Another bullet splintered the wooden post right beside her head, sending a shower of sharp, wooden rain against her cheek. This wasn't just a bar fight spilling into the street. This was an execution, and she was standing right in the middle of it. Suddenly, a man's arm wrapped around her, yanking her with incredible force into a dark, narrow alley. Her back slammed against the rough wood of the general store, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure fear. She looked up at her rescuer. He was tall, weathered, with eyes that looked like they'd seen the end of the world more than once. A fresh cut bled on his cheekbone, and his coat bulged with the unmistakable shape of a holstered gun. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice a low, rough growl. "Don't move until it's over." But Margaret couldn't look away. Through the gap between the buildings, she saw them. Two men facing each other in the muddy street. One wore the tailored suit of a man with money and power. The other wore a dusty duster and the grim expression of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Their words were stolen by the wind, but their intent was crystal clear. The wealthy man drew first. A mistake. He fired 2 quick shots, but the man in the duster was faster. Impossibly fast. He fired only once. His aim was perfect. The wealthy man crumpled, a dark stain spreading like a terrible flower across his fine vest. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Shouts erupted from the saloon. 2 more men burst out, guns already drawn, firing wildly at the man in the duster. He dove behind a water trough, the wood exploding with splinters as bullets tore into it. Margaret's rescuer cursed under his breath. "Stay low," he whispered, and then he was gone, slipping away with the silence of a predator. She should have listened. She should have stayed hidden in the shadows, protecting the small life growing inside her. But she was a midwife, a healer. And when she saw the man in the duster cry out, saw blood blossom across his shoulder as he fell, something inside her just broke. She couldn't watch another person die. She darted from the alley, keeping low, her worn dress dragging in the mud. She reached the fallen man's side, pressing her hands against the gushing wound. "Don't move," she murmured, her voice shaking. "I can help you." The man gasped, his eyes wide with pain and urgency. "Behind you," he choked out. Margaret turned. Time slowed to a crawl. One of the gunmen was standing right there, not 10 feet away, his weapon raised, aiming directly at her head. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She saw the cold, dead purpose in his eyes. And then she saw a flash of fire and heard the thunder of another gun. Her rescuer was back. The gunman who was about to kill her staggered, a look of pure shock on his face. He clutched his chest, then collapsed face first into the mud. The last shooter spun around, firing blindly. Margaret felt the air rush past her face as a bullet missed her by inches. Then her rescuer was there again, a solid wall between her and the danger, returning fire with a deadly practiced calm. When the silence finally fell, it was heavier than any sound. 4 men lay dead or dying in the street. Only her rescuer remained standing, calmly reloading his weapon with hands that knew their work all too well. He turned to her, his expression a strange mix of fury and concern. "You need to leave," he said, his voice hard. "Get on your horse and ride out of town, now." "I'm a midwife," she replied, her hands still pressed against the wounded man's shoulder. "I can't just—" "He's dead, ma'am," the man said, his voice softening just a fraction, "and more will be coming. You were a witness. They'll kill anyone who saw what happened here." She looked down. The dusty man's eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the gray Montana sky. How had she not felt the moment his life slipped away? "Go," her rescuer insisted, taking her arm and pulling her to her feet. Ride north. Don't stop. Forget everything you saw. Forget my face. Who are you? Us, she asked, her hands stained with the blood of a dead man as the first snowflakes began to fall. Nobody worth remembering, he answered. Then he turned and walked toward the saloon, disappearing into the shadows as if he were one of them. Margaret scrambled onto her mare, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. She spurred the animal north, away from the death and the chaos of Willow Creek. As the town vanished behind her, the snow began to fall harder, a thick white curtain coming down, trying to bury the horrors she had just seen. But she knew, you can't bury something like that. It just waits beneath the snow. And she had a terrible feeling that the storm she was riding into was nothing compared to the one she was leaving behind. The blizzard hit without warning. It was a physical thing, a solid wall of white fury that swallowed the world whole. One moment, Margaret could see the trail. The next, she was blind, lost in a swirling vortex of snow and ice. The temperature plunged, and the wind howled like a starving wolf, driving tiny daggers of ice against her skin. She urged her mare onward, trusting the animal's instincts because her own were screaming in terror. The snow was already piling up, making every step a struggle. They couldn't go on much longer. Any animal would falter in this, and her mare was already exhausted. Just a little further, girl, she whispered, her words snatched away by the gale. Her mind reeled, flashing back to the shootout. 4 men dead. Why? For what? And her rescuer, the man who moved like a killer, but had risked his life to save her, a complete stranger. He had the eyes of a man carrying a burden so heavy it was a wonder he could still stand. A man who called himself nobody. A sudden, violent gust of wind nearly tore her from the saddle. The mare whinnied, stumbling sideways. Margaret clung on, her eyes squinting against the blinding white. Was that a shape up ahead? A dark smudge in the chaos? Or was the storm just playing tricks on her? She guided her horse toward it, praying it was shelter and not a mirage. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into the silhouette of an overturned wagon, half buried in a snowdrift. "Hello?" she called out, but the wind had ate her voice. Dismounting, she saw tracks in the snow. Faint, already filling in, but recent. Someone was here, or had been, very recently. She tied her mare to what was left of the wagon and crept around the splintered remains. What she saw on the other side made her heart stop dead in her chest. A man was propped against a boulder, and the snow around him was stained a horrifying crimson. In his arms, he cradled 2 small, blonde-haired children, bundled in blankets. Their faces were red and raw from the cold, but they were alive. It was the man's face that made her breath catch in her throat. It was him, her rescuer from Willow Creek. He looked even worse now. A fresh wound gaped at his temple, blood frozen in a dark river down his cheek. His right leg was twisted at an angle that could only mean it was broken. But the worst part was his eyes. The fierce protector she'd seen in the alley was gone. In his place was a man utterly defeated, exhausted beyond all measure. He recognized her instantly. Disbelief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by a hard, cold suspicion. With a grunt of pain, he shifted one of the children and reached inside his coat. Margaret threw her hands up. "I'm not following you," she said, her voice shaking. "The storm. I was just looking for shelter." "Turn around," he rasped, his voice weak. "Right away." His hand was trembling, but the revolver it held was aimed steadily at her heart. "You're hurt," she said, taking a careful step forward. "Those children need to get warm. I'm a midwife. I can help." "I don't need your help," he growled, but a tremor in his voice betrayed him. One of the children whimpered, a tiny heartbreaking sound. "Maybe you don't," she conceded, her eyes locked on the little ones. "But they do. This storm is getting worse. None of you will survive the night out here." He wavered. The gun lowered just a bit as he glanced down at the precious bundles in his arms. "You shouldn't get involved," he said, his voice strained. "It's not safe." "I've never been one to prioritize safety over doing what's right," she replied, taking another step. "There's an abandoned church about 3 miles from here. St. Thomas. It has a roof and walls. Can you ride?" He grimaced, the pain on his face stark. "Not with this leg, and not with the girls." "Then we'll use my horse," she said, her decision made. "I'll help you." She approached slowly, her hands still visible. "What's your name?" He hesitated, studying her face, searching for a trick, a lie. Finally, he let out a long, pained sigh. Daniel. Daniel Harrison. I'm Margaret Reed, she said, kneeling beside him. Maggie. She smiled gently at the little girls. And who are these two? Grace and Faith, Daniel answered, his voice softening for the first time. They're 2 years old. As she helped him struggle to his feet, supporting his weight, she saw it. A third figure lying a short distance away, almost completely covered by the new-fallen snow. A woman. Her blonde hair was spread out like a frozen halo. Rebecca, Daniel said, his voice breaking. Their mother. My sister. The men from town? Maggie asked quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened into a knot of pure hatred. They found us faster than I expected, he said. Ambushed us at dawn. Maggie looked at the dead woman, so young, with the same delicate features as the twins she would never see grow up. I'm sorry, she whispered. Save it, Daniel snapped, his voice hard as iron again. Help me get the girls to safety. That's all that matters. Getting him and the twins onto her horse was a nightmare of pain and awkward angles. But they managed. Daniel sat in the saddle, one twin in his arms, while Maggie walked, leading the horse and carrying the other. What about her? Maggie asked, nodding toward Rebecca's body. We can't just leave her. We can't take her either, Daniel said, grief and brutal pragmatism at war in his voice. The storm will keep her until I can come back. The living have to come first. As they began their slow, agonizing journey toward the church, Maggie couldn't shake a terrifying question. Who were these men, so determined that they would hunt a family down in the wilderness and murder a young mother in front of her children? What was Daniel Harrison running from? And as the silhouette of their own wagon disappeared into the white void behind them, she had the chilling, unshakable feeling that they were being watched, that somewhere out in the storm, cold, patient eyes were tracking their every move. St. Thomas Church rose out of the blizzard like a ghost ship. It was a dark, weathered stone shape against the swirling white, promising shelter, but also radiating an eerie emptiness. The wind howled around its stone walls, a lonely, mournful sound. There, Maggie called out over the gale, pointing. Just a little further. Daniel, pale with pain, just nodded grimly. Faith had finally fallen asleep against his chest, her tiny body exhausted. Maggie's own legs burned, and her fingers, gripping the mare's reins, were numb stumps of ice. As they got closer, a sense of deep unease washed over her. The heavy wooden door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. And there were horse tracks nearby, nearly filled with snow, leading away from the church. Someone's been here, she said, her voice tight. Recently. Daniel's hand went instinctively to the gun tucked in his coat. We don't have a choice, he said, his voice a low growl. Night's coming. We won't survive out here. He was right. Maggie led the mare up the stone steps. I'll check inside first, she said. Not a chance, he countered. We go in together. After he carefully dismounted, cradling Faith, he drew his revolver. They pushed the door open. The inside was a single, large room filled with dusty, silent pews. Faded light filtered through stained glass windows, painting strange patterns on the stone floor. But the dust wasn't undisturbed. There were footprints everywhere, and near the altar, a small, dark splash of dried blood. Someone was hurt, Maggie whispered. Looks like they left in a hurry, Daniel said, limping through the room, his gun ready. He was right. A satchel was overturned, its contents spilled across the floor. A half-eaten loaf of bread sat on a makeshift table. Whoever was here, they were gone now. They found a small stove in what must have been the pastor's private room behind the altar. It was rusty, but it would work. As Maggie coaxed a fire to life, Daniel searched the rest of the church, his movements slow and pained, but thorough. The twins, Grace and Faith, huddled together on a blanket, their eyes wide and solemn, watching every move. There's a trap door behind the altar, Daniel reported when he came back. Leads to a small cellar. There's some preserved food down there. Enough for a week, maybe. He lowered himself carefully into a wooden chair, his face tight with pain. This place is defensible, if it comes to that. You think it will? Maggie asked, looking up from the growing flames. Daniel's eyes met hers, and they were as cold and hard as the stone walls around them. I know it will, he said. They won't stop looking, just because of a storm. The fire finally roared to life, filling the small room with a blessed, flickering warmth. Maggie gently stripped the snow-crusted outer layers off the twins, checking them for frostbite. They were physically unharmed, but their eyes held a haunted, vacant look that broke her heart. Your leg needs tending, she told Daniel, opening her midwife's bag. And that cut on your head. He started to protest, but then seemed to think better of it and nodded, shrugging out of his heavy coat. As he did, something fell from the folds, a crumpled piece of paper. Maggie bent to pick it up, intending to hand it back to him, but the words scrawled across it stopped her cold. Her blood turned to ice. They know about the treasure. Reed is the key. She froze, the paper trembling in her fingers. Reed. Her name. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. Find something interesting? Daniel's voice was dangerously soft. She looked up. He was watching her, his eyes narrowed, his expression completely unreadable. She held up the paper. This fell from your coat. And you thought you'd read it? The edge in his voice could have cut glass. I couldn't help but see my name, she said, her own voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. Reed, Margaret Reed, remember? She handed him the paper. What does it mean? What treasure? He stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then his gaze flickered to the twins, who had finally dozed off by the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with a chilling suspicion. Why did you bring us here, Miss Reed? To this particular church? The sudden accusation was like a slap. I told you, it was the nearest shelter I knew of. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? He pressed, his eyes boring into hers. You just happened to find us in a blizzard, and you just happen to know of this specific church, the same church where someone left a note about a treasure, and someone named Reed. Maggie's confusion turned to anger. I am a traveling midwife, Mr. Harrison. There was a difficult birth at a homestead a few miles from here last year. They told me about this place. She crossed her arms, her patience gone. Now, are you going to let me tend to that leg, or would you rather sit here questioning my motives until gangrene sets in? The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Finally, Daniel let out a long breath, some of the hostility leaving his posture. I apologize, he said, though he didn't sound particularly sorry. The last few days have taught me to question everything, including the motives of a pregnant woman who just saved you and your nieces from freezing to death? She shot back, moving to examine his leg. His eyes dropped to her midsection, and for the first time, he seemed to notice the slight swell beneath her dress. A look of shock crossed his face. You're with child? 5 months along, she confirmed, carefully cutting away his blood-soaked trouser leg. The father was a traveling preacher who moved on before I knew. I'm on my way to my sister's place to have the baby. The lie came easily. It was simpler than the truth. The break in his leg was clean, but the swelling was already severe. I need to set it, she said, her voice all business now. It's going to hurt. I've had worse, he muttered, gripping the arms of the chair. As she gathered supplies for a splint, he watched her with a new kind of intensity. Not suspicion, but evaluation. You're Jack Reed's daughter, aren't you? He asked suddenly. Maggie's hands stilled. Very few people made that connection anymore. Her father, Jack Reed, had been a legendary bounty hunter, a ghost in the territories before he vanished without a trace 10 years ago. Most people assumed he was dead. How do you know that? She asked carefully. You have his eyes, Daniel said simply. I crossed paths with him once years ago, when I was with the army. Maggie didn't respond. She focused on her work, positioning herself by his leg. Ready? He gave a grim nod, bracing himself. With a single, practiced motion, she pulled, setting the bone back into alignment. His entire body went rigid. A strangled gasp escaped his clenched teeth, but he didn't cry out. Sweat beaded on his forehead as she quickly secured the splint. There, she said when she was done. As she moved to clean the cut on his temple, she couldn't help but notice the other scars that littered his skin. Old bullet wounds, knife cuts, the roadmap of a violent life. You were in the army, she said, keeping her tone light. What did you do after that? His face closed off again. This and that. As she helped him out of his blood-stained shirt to check for other injuries, she saw it. A military tattoo on his forearm, partially obscured by a scar. And around his neck, on a leather cord, hung a metal tag. It glinted in the firelight for just a second before he quickly tucked it away. But she had seen the name stamped into it. It wasn't Daniel Harrison. It was Samuel Ward. Maggie said nothing. She finished tending his wounds, her mind racing. This man, this stranger, had saved her life. He was protecting 2 orphan children, and he was living a lie. The question was why? And the answer, she suspected, was wrapped up in that cryptic note, her father's name, and a treasure that people were willing to kill for. When she finished, he tried to stand. I need to check the perimeter. With that leg, you need to stay off it, she insisted. She gestured to his revolver lying on the table. Show me how to use that. I'll keep watch while you rest. He looked skeptical. Ever fired a gun before? My father made sure I could handle a rifle before I was 12, she replied coolly. After a long moment, he nodded. He checked the weapon, then handed it to her. 6 shots. Don't waste them. If you hear anything, you wake me. Don't try to be a hero. I'm not foolish, she assured him, the weight of the gun feeling cold and alien in her hands. He finally lay down on the narrow bed, his eyes still tracking her every move. Why are you helping us? He asked, his voice rough with fatigue. You could have just ridden on. Maggie paused, her hand resting on her own belly, feeling the faint flutter of life within. I've spent my life helping bring new life into the world, she said softly. I've learned that we're all connected. Your pain is my pain. Those children's future is my future. How could I just ride past and leave you to die? He stared at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. You're either the most genuine person I've ever met, he said finally, or the most convincing liar. Eventually his eyes closed. The blizzard raged outside, but inside the ancient stone walls, a fragile peace had settled. As Maggie kept her lonely vigil, the revolver resting in her lap, her eyes were drawn again and again to the pocket where Daniel, or Samuel, had tucked away that crumpled piece of paper. They know about the treasure. Reed is the key. She had a sickening feeling that she hadn't just stumbled into a random act of violence. She had stumbled into her own past. A past she never knew existed. A past that was about to come hunting for her through the storm. The storm blew itself out during the night, leaving behind a world of eerie, glittering silence. The new day dawned on a landscape buried in snow, the drifts piled high against the church walls. Daniel was already awake, sitting up in bed, carving small wooden figures for the twins with a pocket knife. We're not going anywhere soon, Maggie reported from the window. We have supplies for a week, he said, not looking up. By then, the snow will have melted enough. And your leg will have had time to heal, she added pointedly. A shadow crossed his face. I didn't protect them very well yesterday. Or Rebecca. It wasn't your fault. You were ambushed. I should have known they were following us, he insisted, his voice raw with self-blame. I just thought we had more time. Who are they, Daniel? She asked, her voice low. Why are they hunting you? He was silent for a long time. They're men who believe I have something they want, he said finally. Something valuable. The treasure from the note? Possibly. And do you have it? No, he said, his answer immediate and final. But they don't believe that. And my name? Reed is the key. What does that mean? He looked at the twins, his expression fiercely protective. I don't know for sure, but I have my theories. Before he could explain, Faith, the quieter twin, toddled over to Maggie. She held up one of the freshly carved figures, a tiny, perfect horse. Horsey, she said solemnly, offering it to Maggie. Maggie smiled, her heart aching at the simple gesture. Thank you, sweetheart. Faith nodded, then pointed a small finger at Maggie's stomach. For baby, she added. The kindness of it, from a child who had just lost everything, was almost too much to bear. The baby will love it, Maggie managed to say, her voice thick. They like you, Daniel observed quietly. They sense something in you, a kindness. Rebecca had it too. He looked away, his jaw tight with grief. Maggie sat on the edge of the bed near him. Tell me about her. He began to speak, his voice rough with unshed tears, telling her of a stubborn, brave, brilliant sister who had been raising her daughters alone after her husband died of a fever. How she had written to him for help, having nowhere else to turn. Because of your work, Maggie prompted gently. His eyes met hers, that calculating look returning. Among other reasons, Maggie decided to take a chance, a huge one, including the fact that your name isn't Daniel Harrison. His entire body went rigid. His hand twitched, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. What makes you say that? I saw your tags, Maggie said calmly, holding his gaze. Samuel Ward, I'm not judging you. I just want to understand what we're facing. He seemed to deflate, the fight going out of him. Samuel Ward died in the war, he said flatly. At least that's what the official records say. It was easier that way. Easier for who? Because of what happened after the war, she guessed. Whatever these men think you have? He rubbed a hand over his tired face. It's complicated and dangerous. The less you know, the safer you'll be. I think we are far past the point where ignorance equals safety, she countered. We are snowed in together. Those men are still out there, and my family name is somehow the key to all of this. I deserve to know the truth. He studied her, weighing the risks. What do you know about your father's work? He asked finally. His real work, not just the bounty hunting. The question caught her off guard. His real work? Jack Reed wasn't just hunting outlaws for reward money, Samuel said, his voice low. He was working for the government, gathering intelligence. He was an unofficial agent, a ghost. A spy? Her father? It seemed impossible. But as he spoke, fragmented memories started to click into place. The long absences, the hushed conversations, the way he always seemed to be watching, listening. After the war, Samuel explained, there were concerns about foreign interests in the territories. Your father had a gift for getting people to talk. He could go places, hear things that mattered. And you, were you doing the same thing? He nodded slowly. I was his handler for a time. We were part of a special division. Our work didn't officially exist. What happened? Maggie asked, leaning forward, a sense of dread creeping over her. Your father discovered something. Samuel's voice dropped to a near whisper. Corruption, high-level government officials selling secrets, taking bribes. He gathered evidence. Names. Powerful names. A chill went down her spine. And then he disappeared. He sent me a package first, Samuel said, his expression darkening. Documents, proof. The next day, someone tried to kill me. They burned my house to the ground. The official report said I died in the fire. But you survived. Barely. The evidence was gone. My superiors denied ever knowing me or your father. I was branded a traitor. 10 years ago. It was all 10 years ago. And the men hunting you, Maggie said, the horrifying picture becoming clear. They're connected to this. They work for Victor Blackwood, Samuel said, spitting the name like poison. He was a colonel back then. He was one of the traitors your father exposed. Victor Blackwood, a decorated war hero, a respected public figure. The best traitors always are, Samuel said bitterly, and now he knows I'm alive. He thinks I still have the evidence your father gathered. Do you? No, it was destroyed in the fire. But he'll never believe that. He spent a decade hunting for it. For me. For your father. The treasure, Maggie whispered, understanding now. The evidence is the treasure. She looked at him, her mind racing. And the note? Reed is the key. What did my father do? Just before he disappeared, he told me he'd made a contingency plan, Samuel said. Insurance. Something hidden away that would prove everything, even if we were both gone. He said it was something irrefutable. He leaned closer, his eyes intense. Blackwood thinks your father told you where it is. But I don't know anything. Are you sure? He pressed. Think, Maggie. Did he ever give you anything? Tell you to remember a specific place? A phrase? Her mind flew back. The last weeks before he left. The strange urgency in his eyes. He gave me a book, she said slowly, the memory surfacing like an object from the deep. His old journal. He said to keep it safe, that someday it might be important. Samuel's eyes lit with a sudden fire. Where is it? In my bag. I've carried it with me ever since. She retrieved the weathered leather journal. He took it with hands that trembled slightly, opening it carefully. I've read parts of it, she said. It's just accounts of his bounty hunting days. He wouldn't make it obvious, Samuel muttered, his eyes scanning the pages. It would be hidden, a code maybe, or... He paused, his finger tracing something on the page. Here, look. She leaned closer. Between the words of a seemingly normal entry, there were tiny, almost invisible marks, a series of dots. Morse code, Samuel breathed, his voice electric with discovery. He began translating in his head, his lips moving silently. Then he looked up at her, his eyes wide. St. Thomas Vault, he read. Morning Star knows. He looked around the church, then back at her, a look of dawning horror and amazement on his face. St. Thomas. This church, it's here. The evidence is hidden somewhere right here. It wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny, or a trap. Just then, a sound from outside made them both freeze. It was distant but unmistakable, the crunch of horse hooves on snow. They weren't alone anymore. Samuel grabbed his gun. Get the girls, he whispered, his voice urgent. Take them to the cellar. Now. Stay there until I come for you. You can't fight them with that leg, she protested. I don't intend to, he said, his face a grim mask. I intend to buy you time to escape. There's a hidden passage out of the cellar. Rebecca found it. Now go. He helped her lift the sleeping twins and guided her to the trap door. As she descended into the cold darkness, he stopped her. Promise me, Maggie, no matter what you hear, you stay hidden. If I don't come back by nightfall, you take that passage and you run. Find my brother, Michael Ward. He's a deputy marshal in Helena. Tell him everything. I'm not leaving you, she whispered, her heart breaking. You're carrying precious cargo, he said, his gaze dropping to her belly, then to the twins in her arms. Their lives are in your hands now. Promise me. The hoofbeats were closer now. They would be at the church in minutes. I promise, she whispered, the word tasting like ash. He nodded once, then closed the trap door, plunging her and the children into near-total darkness. Above her, she heard the church door creak open, and then she heard a stranger's voice call out, a voice that was falsely friendly, a voice that dripped with menace. Hello? Saw smoke from the chimney, just looking for a little shelter from the cold. Maggie held her breath, clutching the children tight, listening to the deadly conversation that would decide all of their fates. The voice from above was smooth, almost charming, but it sent a shiver down Maggie's spine. Name's Thomas Clark, the man said. Hunter. Got caught in that blizzard. That's far enough, came Samuel's reply, cold and hard as steel. State your business. Just told you, friend. Looking to warm my hands. You're armed, Samuel observed. It wasn't a question. A brief pause. Man be a fool to travel these parts unarmed, Clark said easily. Too easily. Maggie listened, every muscle tensed. Something was wrong. Clark's story was plausible, but his voice had a rehearsed quality. It was the sound of a predator trying to sound like a lamb. This wasn't a lost hunter. This was one of them. The floorboards above creaked. You're injured, Clark observed, and alone out here with two little ones. That's rough. We manage, Samuel replied, his voice clipped. Beautiful children, Clark continued, and the way he said it made Maggie's skin crawl. They favor their mother, I'd guess. It was a probe, a test. He was fishing for information, trying to confirm he'd found the right man. In her arms, Faith squirmed, turning her face up to Maggie's. Bad man, she whispered, the words so soft they were barely a breath. A child's intuition, pure and terrifyingly accurate. Maggie pressed a finger to her lips, and the little girl nodded, snuggling closer to her sister. The conversation upstairs turned to mundane things. Supplies, the trails, the storm. Clark was playing a part, trying to lull Samuel into a false sense of security. But Maggie knew better. Faith knew better. This man was a wolf, and he was circling. Maggie's eyes scanned the dark cellar. Samuel had mentioned a passage. She had to find it. Now. In the dim light, she saw it, a narrow opening behind a stack of old crates. Keeping the twins clutched to her chest, she began to move silently toward it. As she reached the hidden opening, her foot brushed against something on the dirt floor. A small, leather-bound book, similar to her father's journal. With no time to examine it, she quickly tucked it into her pocket. She had to be ready to run. Above her, the pleasantries had ended. Clark's voice had lost its friendly tone. "You know, Mr. Harrison," he said, the name dripping with sarcasm, "I could have sworn I heard about a man matching your description involved in a shooting down in Willow Creek." "You're mistaken," Samuel said flatly. "We've been here since before the storm." "A coincidence, then," Clark said, his voice laced with menace. "Very funny." The facade was crumbling. "I think you should leave," Samuel said, his voice hardening into a command. "Now that's not very hospitable," Clark sneered, "especially when I've come all this way to find you." "Samuel." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. What happened next was a blur of terrifying sound. A scuffle, the crash of furniture, and then a gunshot, sharp and deafening, that made the twins cry out. "Run!" Samuel roared, his voice filled with a desperate fury. "Maggie, run now!" There was no more time for stealth. Maggie scooped up both children and scrambled for the hidden passage. Another gunshot echoed through the church, followed by a sickening thud, and then silence. A terrible, final silence. The passage was narrow and dark, the air cold and stale. Maggie stumbled forward, her only thought to obey Samuel's last command. The thought of him lying dead or dying on the floor above was a physical pain in her chest. But she couldn't stop. She had promised. The children's lives depended on her. After what felt like an eternity, she saw a faint gray light ahead, a trap door. Shifting the twins to one arm, she shoved against it with all her strength. It gave way with a groan, and she was blinded by a sudden flood of daylight. She emerged into a small, snow-filled clearing behind the church. She helped the twins out, then quickly covered the trap door with snow, hiding their escape. They had to hide. But where? Grace looked up at her, her little face a mask of grief. "Papa hurt." "Your papa is very, very brave," Maggie said, her own voice breaking. "He wants us to be safe." Just then, the main door of the church opened. A figure emerged, moving with a pronounced limp. "Daniel!" It had to be. Hope surged through her. But then a second figure appeared behind him, pressing a gun to his back. It was Clark. He had won, and now he was using Samuel as bait. "Maggie!" Clark's voice echoed across the snow. "I know you can hear me. It's over. Come out, and no one else gets hurt." "Don't do it, Maggie," Samuel yelled, his voice raw with pain. A brutal blow cut him off. "He'll kill us all anyway." A gunshot rang out. A bullet tore through the bark of a tree inches from her head. They were trapped. Clark could pick them off from the church steps. "I'm coming out," she screamed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Don't hurt him." She knelt before the twins. "I need you to be very, very brave," she whispered, looking into their identical blue eyes. "Do exactly as I say." They both nodded, their small faces filled with a trust that broke her heart. With the twins' hands held tightly in hers, she stepped out from the trees into the open. She was walking toward a monster with two innocent children and another life growing inside her. She had no weapon, no plan. All she had was a desperate hope that she could somehow trade her life for theirs. But as she walked, she remembered what her rescuer had told her back in Willow Creek. He wasn't a hero. He was nobody worth remembering, and she was the daughter of Jack Reed. And that had to count for something. As Maggie walked across the snow-covered clearing, the world seemed to shrink down to the man on the church steps. Clark held Samuel in a brutal grip, the barrel of his revolver pressed hard against Samuel's temple. Blood streamed down Samuel's face, but his eyes were locked on Maggie, filled with a desperate, silent plea for her to run. "That's far enough," Clark shouted. "Now where is it? The evidence. Jack Reed's treasure." "I don't know what you're talking about," Maggie said, her voice shaking but firm. Clark laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He shifted the gun, aiming it directly at the twins. "Maybe this will help you remember," he sneered. "Children are so fragile." "No!" Maggie cried, instinctively shielding the girls with her body. "Then start talking." Samuel caught her eye, and in that split second, A plan, a desperate gamble formed in her mind. They couldn't give him what he wanted. He'd kill them all the second he had it. "It's in the cellar," she said, the lie tasting like poison. "Behind the food stores. There's a loose stone in the wall." Clark's eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with greed. "Fine," he said, shoving Samuel to his knees in the snow. "You first. The woman and one of the brats. The other one stays with me. Insurance." He grabbed Faith's arm, yanking the terrified child to his side. Faith didn't cry. She just stared at her sister, a silent communication passing between them. Inside the cold, silent church, Maggie led Grace toward the cellar, her mind racing. The cellar was a dead end. Clark would realize she was lying in moments. She had to find something, anything, to use as a weapon. As they descended the steps into the darkness, she whispered to Grace, "Stay behind me." She made a show of moving crates, her hands searching the rough stone walls. "Well?" Clark called down impatiently. "Almost," she replied. Her fingers brushed against a section of the wall that felt different. Wood, not stone. There was a carving on it. A star. The morning star. "I found something," she called up. "A door." Clark appeared at the top of the stairs, his face alight with triumph. "Open it!" As Maggie fumbled with the hidden door, Grace tugged on her skirt, pointing to a small, flat stone on the dirt floor. Another star was carved on it. On instinct, Maggie pressed the stone to the symbol on the door. There was a soft click, and the hidden door swung inward. Inside was a small, dark space, and in that space sat a metal box. "Bring it up here," Clark ordered. "Now!" He was already starting down the stairs, dragging a terrified Faith with him. Maggie made a split-second decision. She grabbed the box, shoved it into Grace's small hands. "Hide," she whispered fiercely. "The passage. Run. Find help." Grace's eyes were wide, but she nodded, clutching the box and disappearing into the shadows just as Clark reached the bottom of the steps. "Where is it?" Clark demanded, his eyes darting around the empty cellar. "And where's the other one?" She was scared. "She ran back upstairs," Maggie lied, her heart pounding. He raised his gun, aiming it at Faith's head. "You're lying. Where is she? Where's the box?" "Let her go, Clark." A new voice. Samuel. He stood at the top of the cellar stairs, bloodied but standing tall, and in his hands he held Clark's own rifle. Clark's face twisted with rage. "How?" "You should have checked if I was really unconscious," Samuel said grimly. "Now let the girl go." Clark grabbed Faith, using her as a human shield. "You won't risk hitting her." "I don't need to," Samuel said calmly, "because she's smarter than you are." As if on cue, Faith bit down, hard on the hand that held her. Clark yelped in pain, his grip loosening just for a second. It was all the time Faith needed. She wriggled free and darted to Maggie's side. Clark raised his revolver, but he was too slow. The rifle in Samuel's hands roared, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Clark staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his gun clattering to the floor. "It's over," Samuel said, descending the stairs. "Where's Grace?" "Safe," Maggie breathed. "With the box." She ran to the hidden passage. "Grace, it's safe. You can come out." But there was only silence. The passage was empty. "She's gone," Maggie whispered, a new wave of terror washing over her. "I told her to run." "She's a survivor, like her mother," Samuel said. "But we have to find her before someone else does." Behind them, Clark let out a pained, gurgling laugh. "You're too late," he gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. "Blackwood's men are already on their way. They'll find the girl, and then they'll find you." Just then, they heard it. More hoofbeats, at least 4 riders coming fast. "We can't outrun them," Maggie said, despair creeping in. "You can," Samuel said, his face set like stone. He pressed the rifle into her hands. "Take Faith. Use the passage. I'll hold them off. Buy you time to find Grace." "That's suicide." "My daughter's lives depend on you," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now go." There was no time. The riders were almost at the church. With one last, agonizing look at the man who had twice saved her life, Maggie took Faith into her arms and plunged back into the darkness of the secret passage. As she fled, she heard the sounds of gunfire erupt behind her. She was running away from one battle, only to face another, finding a 2-year-old child, alone in the vast, unforgiving Montana wilderness, with a treasure that the most dangerous men in the territory would kill to possess. The weight of her promise to Samuel felt heavier than any mountain. The escape tunnel felt like being buried alive. It was cramped, dark, and the air was thick with the cold smell of earth. Behind them, the sounds of the gunfight at the church grew faint, then disappeared entirely, replaced by the sound of Maggie's own ragged breathing and Faith's terrified whimpers. "Shh, little one," Maggie whispered, trying to sound calm for the child's sake. "Your papa is very brave." But in her heart, she feared she was already a widow to a man she barely knew. After an eternity, they emerged from the trap door into the snow-covered clearing behind the church. The world was silent, pristine, and terrifyingly empty. But there, leading away into the dense forest, was a set of tiny footprints. Grace's tracks. "She went this way," Maggie told Faith. The little girl wriggled out of Maggie's arms and, to Maggie's astonishment, began following the trail with a strange, unerring purpose. It was as if she were connected to her sister by some invisible thread. Maggie followed, her eyes constantly scanning the trees, every snap of a twig making her jump. The silence from the church was deafening. Had Samuel won, or had he fallen? They walked for what felt like miles, deeper and deeper into the forest. Suddenly, Faith stopped. She cocked her head, listening to something Maggie couldn't hear. "Grace," she whispered, pointing toward a thicket of snow-laden pine trees. Maggie saw nothing. "Are you sure?" Faith nodded emphatically, then called out, her tiny voice seeming huge in the stillness. "Grace, come out!" For a moment, there was nothing. Then a small figure emerged from beneath the low-hanging branches. It was Grace, shivering and tear-streaked, but clutching the metal box to her chest like a shield. Maggie ran to her, sweeping her up in a hug, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. "Bad men," Grace said, her voice small but clear. "Coming." She pointed back toward the church, and then chillingly in a different direction, toward the main road. "More coming." They were being flanked, hunted from two sides. Blackwood was closing his trap. They needed to hide, but where? The wilderness offered no shelter. But again, it was Faith who seemed to know the way. She tugged on Maggie's skirt, pointing deeper into the woods. "This way," she said, with an authority that was impossible to question. With no other choice, Maggie followed. The twins led her through the thinning trees to a small clearing. In the center stood a tiny, weathered cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Someone was home. Maggie pulled the children back into the trees. "Wait," she whispered, but it was too late. The cabin door opened, and an old woman emerged. She was thin and straight-backed, with braided gray hair, and the calm, knowing face of someone who understood the secrets of the forest. She looked directly at their hiding place. "I see you there," she called, her voice surprisingly strong. "Come out where I can see you." Before Maggie could react, the twins broke away from her, running toward the old woman with cries of pure joy. "Morning Star!" they shouted in unison. "Morning Star!" The name from her father's journal, the one who knows. The old woman's face softened as the twins reached her. She placed a hand on each of their heads. "Little ones," she said, her voice warm with affection, "I have been waiting for you." Maggie approached cautiously. "You know these children?" The woman's dark eyes met hers. "I knew their mother and their father." Her gaze was piercing, as if she could see right into Maggie's soul. "Just as I knew your father, Margaret Reed." The world tilted on its axis. How could this woman possibly know who she was? "Jack spoke of you often," Morningstar said, answering the unspoken question. "Come inside. Night is coming, and with it, men who mean you harm. We have much to discuss." Inside, the cabin was warm and filled with the scent of pine and sage. As Morningstar gave the hungry children bowls of stew, Maggie's mind reeled. "You know what's happening," she said. "You know about the evidence." "I know many things," the old woman replied, settling into a rocking chair. She gestured to the metal box, which Grace had placed by the hearth. "I see you found what Jack hid." "We don't know what's in it," Maggie admitted. "It contains truth," Morningstar said. "And truth, like fire, can warm a home or burn it to ashes." "These men killed Rebecca," Maggie said, her voice choked with emotion. "They may have just killed Samuel. We have to do something." Samuel Ward is a difficult man to kill, Morningstar said calmly. He has survived worse. And the children, they have his spirit and their mother's gift. Their gift? The seeing, Morningstar explained. Rebecca could sometimes glimpse things hidden from others. The twins share this gift. That explained it. How they knew things, found their way. But it also raised a terrifying possibility. Is that why Blackwood wants them? Not just to hurt Samuel? Victor Blackwood desires power, Morningstar confirmed. He believes such gifts can be controlled. When he learned of Rebecca's abilities, he pursued her. When she rejected him, his desire turned to obsession. A cold dread washed over Maggie. Are you saying, is he one of the twins' father? Morningstar's gaze was filled with a deep sadness. Yes, Faith bears his blood, though thankfully not his spirit. Grace is the child of Samuel's brother. The revelation was like a physical blow. The monster hunting them was Faith's father. Does Samuel know? Maggie whispered, horrified. He knows. It is why they fled. Blackwood wanted to take his daughter. And the box? Maggie asked, desperate to change the subject. What is in it? Morningstar took a small key from a drawer and unlocked the metal box. Inside lay a stack of papers, a small journal, and several maps. Your father was a careful man, she said. He knew accusations were not enough. This is proof. Documents, letters, financial records. Irrefutable evidence of treason. She closed the box. Blackwood knows this evidence exists. It is why he has become so reckless. We have to get this to the authorities, Maggie insisted. Not all authorities can be trusted, Morningstar cautioned. The corruption runs deep, but there is one. Samuel's brother, Michael, a deputy marshal in Helena. He has been quietly investigating Blackwood for years. He is a man you can trust. Then we have to get to Helena. Yes, Morningstar agreed, but not tonight. The forest is full of Blackwood's men. You will stay here. Rest. In the morning I will show you a path, a secret way that your father prepared long ago. Exhausted beyond measure, Maggie finally allowed herself to rest. But as she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Samuel, alone fighting in the snow. She had a family to protect, a mission to complete. But she couldn't shake the terrible feeling that to save the future, she may have had to sacrifice the one man who had given them a chance to have one. And in her dreams, she saw him, bloodied but defiant, facing down a dozen men, his face a mask of cold fury as he fought to buy her just a little more time. Sometime in the dead of night, a sound pulled Maggie from a deep, dreamless sleep. It was a soft scratching at the cabin door. Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed the iron fire poker, her hands slick with sweat, and crept toward the door. The scratching came again, followed by a faint, pained whisper. Maggie, it's me. It was Samuel. She threw the bolt and wrenched the door open. He practically fell into her arms, half conscious, his face ashen. He was covered in blood. My God, you're hurt. Not as bad as it looks, he murmured, leaning heavily on her as she guided him to the cot. Most of it's not mine. In the dim firelight, she saw a fresh bullet wound grazing his shoulder, and his splinted leg was soaked through with blood. He had fought his way through Blackwood's men and then tracked them through the dark, snowy forest. He was a man made of pure iron will. The twins? He gasped, his eyes searching the small cabin. Safe, she assured him, already tearing strips from her petticoat to use as bandages. As she worked, cleaning and dressing his wounds, he saw the open metal box on the table. Morningstar told you? Everything, she said quietly. About Faith. About your brother. His jaw tightened. Rebecca never wanted Blackwood near them. When he found out Faith was his, he tried to take her, said a child of his blood belonged with him. The pain in his voice was about more than his physical wounds. And Grace? Michael's, he confirmed, his voice softening. He and Rebecca, before the war. When Blackwood started making threats, Michael sent her to me. He couldn't acknowledge them, not while he was investigating. It would have put them all in even more danger. The story was a tangled web of secrets and sacrifice. "The men at the church?" she asked. "They won't be following us," he said, his tone flat and final. He had done what he had to do. Just then, the cabin door opened again. Morning Star entered, carrying a bundle wrapped in deerskin. She showed no surprise at seeing Samuel. "The time has come," she said, her voice grave. "Blackwood's main force is coming. He is leading them himself. By midday, they will be here." Samuel struggled to sit up. "We have to move. Now." "You cannot outrun them," Morningstar stated simply. "Not in your condition, not with the children, but there is another way. A path Jack Reed prepared 10 years ago." She unrolled a map on the table. "Your father created a lifeline, Margaret. A way for the truth to get out, even if he couldn't deliver it himself." Her finger traced a route northwest, through the most rugged and impassable mountains. "There is a trading post here," she said. "Crowfoot, run by a man Jack trusted with his life, Tom Jenkins. He has been waiting all these years for someone to bring him this." She held up a letter sealed with wax. "Instructions from your father." "It's 2 days' journey at least," Samuel said, studying the treacherous route. "But it is away from the roads Blackwood will be watching," Morningstar countered. "You must leave within the hour." As the old woman gathered supplies for them, food, medicine, warmer clothes for the children, Maggie felt a wave of despair. She was 5 months pregnant, traveling with a severely injured man and 2 traumatized toddlers, being hunted by a small army through the frozen wilderness. The odds weren't just long, they were impossible. Samuel must have seen the fear in her eyes. He reached out and took her hand. "We'll make it," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "All of us." Looking into his eyes, eyes that had seen so much loss but still held a core of unbreakable strength, Maggie felt her own courage returning. "All of us," she repeated, squeezing his hand. They left as the first pale light of dawn touched the snow. Morning Star had fashioned a carrier for Faith, which Maggie wore on her back. Samuel, despite his injuries, insisted on carrying Grace. "Blackwood will find this cabin," Maggie said to Morning Star as they prepared to leave. "He will know you helped us." The old woman's face was serene. "I do not fear men like Victor Blackwood," she said. She pressed a small leather-bound book into Maggie's hand, the one Maggie had found in the cellar. "This belongs to you now. Read it when you are ready to understand." Then she turned to Samuel. "You have carried your burden long enough, Samuel Ward. The time has come to lay it down." With a final grateful look, they plunged into the forest. They moved in silence, every step an agony, every rustle of the wind a potential threat. By mid-morning, they reached a high ridge. Samuel pointed to a distant pass in the mountains. "Crowfoot Pass," he said. "The trading post is just beyond." It looked impossibly far. They pushed on, the day a blur of snow and pain and exhaustion. In the afternoon, Faith, riding on Maggie's back, suddenly went rigid. "Bad men," she whispered, her voice filled with terror. "Coming!" Samuel scanned their back trail. "Scouts," he muttered. "They're gaining on us." The forest here was sparse. There was nowhere to hide. "You take the girl," he said, his voice grim. "Follow the path Morning Star showed us. I'll create a diversion. Draw them away." "No!" Maggie protested. "We stay together." "This is the only way," he insisted. The sound of distant voices confirmed it. The scouts were close. He knelt, kissing each of his daughters on the forehead. "Be brave," he whispered. Then he looked at Maggie, his eyes filled with a world of unspoken emotion. "Get them to my brother," he said. On a desperate impulse, Maggie grabbed the front of his coat. "Come back to us," she whispered fiercely. "Promise me." For a second, his stoic mask cracked. A flicker of something deep and vulnerable showed in his eyes. "I promise to try," he said. Then he turned and crashed off through the trees, deliberately making as much noise as possible. Maggie, her heart shattering, forced herself to turn and run in the opposite direction. Grace's small hand in hers, Faith a silent weight on her back. She was alone again, responsible for these 2 precious lives, fleeing an enemy she couldn't see, and praying for the return of a man she was beginning to realize she could not bear to lose. The forest was silent except for the pounding of her own blood in her ears. She ran, knowing that every step she took away from him might be a step he had paid for with his life. The forest was a maze of white and gray, and every shadow looked like a threat. Maggie ran, stumbling through the deep snow, her lungs burning, Grace's small hand clutched tightly in hers. They had to keep moving. They had to make Samuel's sacrifice mean something. After an hour that felt like a lifetime, Faith, still riding on Maggie's back, tensed again. "They coming," she whispered, her voice a terrified hiss. Samuel's diversion hadn't worked, or it hadn't worked for long enough. Maggie frantically searched for a place to hide. A massive fallen log, half buried in snow, offered their only chance. She shoved the children into the hollow space beneath it, then squeezed in after them, pulling snow and branches over the opening. They huddled together in the cold, cramped darkness, their breath fogging in the air. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then they heard it, boots crunching on snow. Men's voices, cold and professional. "Tracks lead this way," one said. He was close, too close. Ward was heading east. Blackwood wants him alive. "What about the woman and the kids?" another voice asked. There was a pause that chilled Maggie to the bone. "Kids alive, especially the girl. The woman, use your judgment." They were talking about executing her, right here in front of the children. The footsteps circled their hiding place, coming so near Maggie could have reached out and touched a leather boot. She held her breath, shielding the twins with her body, preparing for the end. Faith gripped her hand, her tiny fingers surprisingly strong. Then inexplicably, the footsteps stopped. Through a tiny gap in the branches, Maggie saw the tracker freeze. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, then turned and walked away. "Nothing here," he called to his partner. "Trail's gone cold." "Impossible," the other man growled. "I'm telling you, they're not here." After a few more moments of searching, the men moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Maggie waited, her heart hammering, until she was sure they were gone. How had they not seen them? It was impossible. Grace smiled, holding up the small, smooth stone Morningstar had given her. The one with the star etched on it. "Magic," she said simply. Maggie didn't know what to believe anymore, but she knew they had been saved. They pushed on, finally reaching the cave. Morningstar had told them about just as darkness fell. It was a small, sheltered space, and Maggie risked a tiny fire deep inside, where the smoke would rise through a natural chimney in the rock. As the twins huddled by the flames, exhausted, Faith stared out into the dark forest. "Papa hurt," she said, her voice small but certain. "Bad men hurt him." A new wave of fear washed over Maggie. "Can you see him, sweetheart?" Faith shook her head. "Feel him," she said, placing a hand over her heart. "Here." That night, as the twins slept, Maggie finally opened the second journal, the one Morningstar had said was for her. It was from her father. The pages were filled not with bounty-hunting logs, but with the truth. The truth about his work as a government agent, his discovery of Blackwood's treason, and his desperate plan to protect both the evidence and his daughter. "My dearest Margaret," the last entry read, "if you are reading this, I am likely gone. Know that everything I did to create a world worthy of you. The path ahead will be hard, but you are not alone. Samuel Ward, if he still lives, is a man you can trust completely. You have a strength you do not yet realize. You are my daughter. You are the key." Tears streamed down Maggie's face as she read the words of the father she had thought abandoned her. He hadn't abandoned her. He had been protecting her all this time. And now the fight was hers. Near midnight, a sound from outside the cave made her grab the revolver. Footsteps, slow and dragging, approached. "Maggie?" A voice called, weak and strained. It was Samuel. He stumbled into the firelight, collapsing into her arms. He was wounded again, his face bruised and cut, but he was alive. "The scouts are dealt with," he gasped. "But Blackwood's main force, they're moving faster than I thought. They have dogs. They'll find this cave by morning. We have to move. Now." Leaving the shelter of the cave felt like madness. A blizzard was starting to rage outside. But staying meant capture, or worse. They woke the children and plunged out into the swirling maelstrom of snow and wind. The night was a frozen hell of climbing, stumbling, and fighting for every step. They finally found shelter in a tiny abandoned trapper's cabin high in the mountains just before dawn, collapsing in a heap, safe for the moment, but trapped by the storm. When the blizzard finally broke, the world was a blinding expanse of white. Crowfoot is 10 miles from here, Samuel said, his face grim. We have to make it by nightfall. We're out of food. The journey that day was the hardest yet. The deep snow was a relentless enemy, and by midday they saw them. Dark figures on their back trail, moving fast. Blackwood's men, Samuel said. They're gaining. They pushed on, their bodies screaming in protest, driven by pure fear and adrenaline. As dusk began to fall, they saw it. Crowfoot Pass. And beyond it, the welcoming lights of the trading post. They were almost there. But as they started down toward the pass, Faith stopped dead. No, she said, her voice sharp with terror. Bad men there, too. Samuel pulled out his rifle, using the scope to scan the pass. His face went pale. She's right, he breathed. Blackwood himself. It's a trap. They've cut us off. They were caught, pinned between two groups of hunters with impassable cliffs on either side. It was over, but Faith wasn't finished. Other way, she insisted, pointing to a tiny, treacherous-looking game trail that clung to the side of the mountain. Safe. It was a suicidal path, a narrow ledge with a sheer drop into the abyss. But it was their only chance. Trusting the child's uncanny instinct, they started along the ledge. It was a terrifying, heart-stopping traverse. They were halfway across when a shout from above told them they'd been spotted. A rifle shot cracked through the air, sending rock chips flying past their heads. Run! Samuel yelled. They scrambled along the ledge, shots ringing out around them, slipping and sliding toward a shallow cave Faith seemed to know was there. They piled inside, momentarily safe. I'll hold them here, Samuel said, checking his rifle. You take the girls and the evidence and run. No, Maggie said, her voice fierce and absolute. We stay together. All of us make it, or none of us do. She grabbed his hand and Grace and Faith completed the circle, their small family united against the world. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, a new sound echoed through the mountains, a sound that was not human, a low, menacing howl, then another and another, until the air was filled with the terrifying chorus of a wolf pack. The shouts from above turned to screams of panic. The pursuit had stopped. Samuel looked at Maggie, a slow smile spreading across his weary face. Morning Star, he said. She said she could call the forest to her aid. Now, he said, and they ran. They scrambled the rest of the way down the mountain and across the valley floor toward the trading post. The main gate was open, a lantern casting a warm, yellow glow. A tall, white-bearded man stood waiting for them. He looked at Samuel's wounds, at Maggie's pregnant belly, at the exhausted twins, and at the metal box. Jack Reed said, "You might come someday," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm Tom Jenkins. I've been waiting." He stepped aside and let them pass into the sanctuary of the trading post, barring the heavy gate behind them. They were safe, for now. But they all knew Blackwood was still out there, in the darkness, and he would not give up his hunt. The final battle was yet to come. If you've been on the edge of your seat listening to Maggie and Samuel's incredible journey, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this story ends, and trust me, the biggest twists are still to come. Drop a comment below and let me know. What would you have done if you were trapped on that mountain? Now let's get back to it.